Good morning to everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that we've done in Acre. Acre is up north in Brazil, and it's a little bit of information about something that's happened over the past 12 years, more or less. We've seen a number of instruments being turned into public policies that really zoom in on the production of goods and service of an environmental nature. So as I said, Acre is right here, up north in Brazil, close to Bolivia and Peru. And I want to talk a little bit about the setting. Very quickly, actually, I'll be addressing the issues of instruments to organize the landscape and how these instruments have actually morphed into public policies. And I'm going to be making a specific reference to one of those policies. So Acre, here it is, up north in Brazil. It's about 164,000 square kilometers and a population of 655,000 plus, about 88% forest coverage. As I said, it's up close to Peru and Bolivia. And I'm going to briefly talk about these legislations that we have in place. First, we need to talk about the zoning. The state is considered to be a single element, and we've actually studied the weaknesses and strengths that the department can be defined by. So here you see a little bit of a graphic representation of how the department is organized. This is 1 per 250,000 scale. So if we look at our breakdown, a number of different instruments have been set up. One of them is the state system of what we call áreas naturales protegidas, protected natural areas. And we're also working on managing our hydro, focusing on the need to organize the resources and the basins which need some kind of a recovery. This code defines the interesting basins, and we're going to be working with different committees in order to really manage these basins as effectively as possible. Apart from that, although we're very far away from the rest of Brazil, well, we have a number of problems that have to do with solid waste management, for instance. So here you have one of the codes. Now we're working at a municipal level, so we're working closer to the ground, as it were. We're focusing on the details. We're working with persons, we're managing, we're seeing how we can actually go about availing ourselves of the different ecosystems, the different settings in the different municipalities. This is what we call the OTL, and here it's 1 per 100,000. Apart from that, we have about 15% of these areas are used and lived in by indigenous peoples. So what we're trying to do is come up with mechanisms in order to work with these tribal peoples. So this is what we have defined as ethno-zoning. And this is undertaken with some technical experts who don't instruct the tribal peoples to handle and manage their territory. No, what these technical experts do is talk to the tribal peoples and understand how they want to manage and handle their territories. We're also working on different parts of the department, what we call ZEDs, the Special Development Zones. This is basically where more population concentrates, and of course this is where we feel that we need to focus on. We feel that we need to focus on ensuring that the infrastructures are in place, but also we need to see how we can go about recovering the landscape. And then if we look at things from a local vantage point, we have, as I said, 260,000 square kilometers, and most of the population concentrates in the cities. But there are very, very, very many isolated communities, and these are persons who need services. So here it's 1 to 100,000. Last year we worked with these persons in 100 different communities. Well, this toolkit that I've just defined deals with a department as a whole, and this actually has become a useful tool. The aim now is to turn this into a public policy. There is a series of public policies that I'm going to define, and all of them together have allowed the Department of Acre now to have 50% of its land in conservation units. So 10% is for holistic protection, 14% is tribal people's lands, 26% is for sustainable use. And what we have also is, as we saw in the previous presentation, we have to ensure that the people who live in this 50% that is subject to conservation, well, that these persons can live a dignified human life. There's legislation now whereby the state will contribute monies not to ensure that these indigenous peoples just sit there and we pay for them. No, what we're going to be seeing is an incentive to ensuring that tribal peoples live with dignity. So these are the tools. As I explained before, this is the breakdown. Yes, of course, there is an approach to biodiversity, climate regulation, conservation of soil, conservation of hydro resources, assessment of cultural and traditional knowledge, beautiful landscapes. These are parts of the policy, and in order to actually develop these policies, we focused on 6 areas, 6 bullet points. Basically, all of them have protected forests on board, and they are at a risk of evolving into something else. In these 6 areas that we have defined as priority areas, this is where the Acre government is implementing the policy of a tax on environmental services. So let's see, we would be talking about 5.8 million hectares, 35% of the state, and it's a 4% deforestation rate. We have some 7,500 families, 600 indigenous with 4 ethnic groups, and 100 properties. So the challenge is not only ensuring that we keep the ecosystem in health, but what we want to do is ensure that the people who live there, as I said before, we want them to live with dignity. We live in cities and we benefit from the services that these ecosystems are providing to us. So we need, in turn, to ensure that the people who live there live with dignity. And this is just for our own survival, actually, because we as human beings have specific needs. And when the minimum living conditions are not in place, we seek to progress, and progress sometimes calls for logging trees, and sometimes it calls for polluting. It calls for doing things to the landscape which will be bad for the landscape in the long term. So the challenge we face now is how to develop these general policies and ensure that they trickle down to the local level. In other words, we need to make sure that all of us together live shoulder to shoulder, all of us benefiting from the forests and the services they provide. So let me then conclude by saying that availing ourselves of these instruments to manage the landscape, and this based on decisions taken by stakeholders in Acre, has allowed for the maintenance, conservation and valuation of goods and services such as water, carbon, biodiversity, allowing for the sustainable development of the state of Acre in Brazil. And let me add that all of us need, when we talk about services, ES services, we need to think that we are, all of us, part of a chain. If we don't come up with policies and actions that go from the global to the local, we are not going to achieve anything. We're not going to be able to guarantee these services. We're not sure that we're going to be able to survive in this changing world of ours. Thank you.